Clara Wynne yawned against the sterile, humming walls of the tour shuttle, her small hands gripping the edge of the seat like it could hold her tether to the world she knew. The Earth she had left behind, warm, bustling, and annoyingly structured, was already fading from her memory, replaced by a neon blur of colors and shapes she couldn't name. She had been spoiled her whole life: private tutors, vacations to exotic resorts, a father who indulged every whim, a mother who protected her from every scrape, every minor heartbreak. And now, she was suspended in a vessel that wasn't hers, hurtling through a void she didn't understand, with only the faint hum of the engines and the occasional flicker of lights to keep her company. She tried to stretch her legs, but the seat was narrow, the cabin walls curving like they had been molded around some organic, living spine. Her stomach knotted. "This has to be a dream," she whispered, though her voice sounded small against the cold, resonant metal of the shuttle. She had never felt powerless before. It was a sensation that made her skin crawl, and she hated it. Then the lights dimmed. Soft, pale green illumination pooled along the floor and ceiling. The hum changed, warbling slightly, like it was responding to something outside of her perception. Clara's heart leapt. She pressed her forehead against the seat in front of her, trying to steady her racing thoughts. "Mom," she called out softly, imagining her mother walking up, brushing her hair out of her eyes, holding her hand. Silence. The shuttle was empty except for her. The walls rippled. Clara froze. She blinked. The floor seemed to stretch, elongating, then shrinking again. Her stomach churned, and for a moment, she thought she was going to be sick. The sensation lasted only a heartbeat, but it was enough to make her jump to her feet. Her small fingers traced the curved wall. It was smooth, unnervingly smooth, like skin. She recoiled, pressing herself back against the seat. A sudden vibration ran through the cabin. She stumbled, gripping the edge of the seat again. Through the viewport, she saw stars smear into streaks of color, impossibly fast, like the universe itself had been smeared across glass. She screamed, but it was swallowed by the hull. Then a voice, calm and melodic, spoke from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Do not be afraid, human child." Clara whirled around. No one was there. Her pulse hammered in her chest. "Who's there?" she demanded. Her voice was firmer than she felt, though it cracked halfway through. "Do not resist," the voice repeated. "You are safe. Curiosity is rewarded." Safe. The word felt like a lie, but the melody of it was almost comforting. Clara's body trembled. Her eyes scanned the cabin, catching glimpses of shapes in the corners, tall, translucent figures that dissolved when she blinked, limbs refracting light like prisms. She ducked behind the seat, squeezing her eyes shut, and pressed her face to her knees. Her thoughts raced back to Earth, her father's voice calling her to dinner, the faint scent of her mother's perfume, the warm sun on her face. She felt a pang of longing so deep it made her stomach twist. She had never known fear like this, utter, consuming fear that gnawed at the edges of her mind. A shift in the air made her look up. One of the shimmering forms had solidified. It was taller than any human, slender, with limbs bending in angles that shouldn't exist. Its face, or what she perceived as a face, was a cascade of colors, shifting like oil on water. And then it smiled. Or at least she thought it did. "You are here because of your potential," it said. The voice was now tied to the form, resonating directly in her skull, bypassing her ears entirely. Potential to observe. Potential to learn. Potential to transform. Clara's throat went dry. She wanted to scream, to run, to collapse into sobs, but no sound came. She felt like a leaf in a hurricane, tossed in directions she couldn't anticipate, entirely subject to forces she did not understand. The figure approached, and Clara's mind screamed that she should resist, but her body froze. Its presence was magnetic, suffocating, and the hum in the walls intensified. Light flared in the corners of her vision, shapes bending and stretching, stretching and bending. She realized her fingers were gripping the seat so tightly her nails dug crescents into her palms. "You will adapt," it continued, voice calm, insistent. You will find what is lost. You will create what is needed. Clara wanted to argue. Wanted to demand to be sent back. But the words that formed in her mouth were swallowed by the overwhelming sensation of the room, of the ship, of the alien world that waited beyond the viewport. Her body shook uncontrollably, but slowly, almost imperceptibly, the panic ebbed just enough for her mind to observe. Observe. Learn. Transform. A panel slid open along the floor, revealing steps leading down into a corridor lit with soft luminescent panels. The figure gestured, and though Clara's body screamed no, her feet moved. They obeyed, as though gravity, fear, and instinct had been overridden. She took the first step. Then another. Her pulse raced, her stomach knotted with dread and fascination. The corridor stretched endlessly, or perhaps it folded back on itself, Clara couldn't tell. Everything she had understood about space, time, and the solidity of the world dissolved around her. At the end of the corridor, she found a small chamber. Shapes shifted inside, forms bending light and shadow into patterns she could not name. And then she saw it, other humans, sitting quietly, some staring at walls, some whispering to themselves, all caught in the same suspended state she had felt in the shuttle. One boy lifted his head, eyes locking with hers. Fear, anger, and resignation swirled in his gaze. Clara's chest tightened. This was no dream. No simulation she had ever experienced on Earth. This was real. She was captured. And she was not alone. The figure stepped back, leaving her at the threshold. Its colors shimmered one last time before fading into the walls. You will find your place, it said. Or the world will remake you. And Clara, trembling and defiant, stepped fully into the chamber, her spoiled life of certainty, comfort, and protection stripped away, leaving only her own fragile humanity to navigate the alien calculus of survival. Clara's feet felt like they were walking through thick water as she followed the twisting corridor deeper into the facility. The light shifted with her movements, glowing panels bending subtly around corners, almost as if the walls themselves were alive and aware of her presence. Every step made her heart hammer harder, every breath tasted metallic, like the air itself was strained through a sieve she could not see. The boy from the chamber had not moved, just watched her as she entered, eyes dark with resignation. He did not speak. She wanted to ask his name, to demand answers, but the weight of the unknown kept her tongue locked. Instead, she followed the path, guided by a faint vibration in the floor, a pulse she couldn't explain but instinctively obeyed. The corridor widened suddenly into a circular chamber. In the center floated a platform, suspended without visible support, its surface rippling like liquid glass. The air hummed louder here, a resonant vibration that prickled Clara's skin. Around the perimeter, translucent figures moved, less defined than the one in the shuttle, gesturing to consoles that seemed both biological and mechanical at once. Their limbs refracted light, bending the colors of the room in impossible ways. One of them stepped closer, a figure taller than the others, its presence undeniable. It spoke without moving its lips, the sound vibrating directly in Clara's skull. Observation is your first step. Curiosity your guide. Compliance will accelerate understanding. Clara froze, panic rising in her chest. I don't understand, she stammered. Her voice cracked. She had never been afraid like this before. Every nightmare she had ever imagined paled in comparison to this chamber, these beings, and the oppressive intelligence that seemed to watch her from every angle. You will, the figure replied, voice soothing and firm simultaneously. You will, because you must. Resistance is an illusion, human child. From somewhere to her left, another shape emerged, more solid than the others, with limbs that bent in fluid angles. It seemed almost friendly, though Clara could not trust that instinct. The shape projected a gentle vibration through the floor, and Clara felt a flicker of calm. She took a tentative step forward, then another, until she was standing near the floating platform. Here, the figure said, humans are introduced to the first stage. Observation of potential, engagement with the unfamiliar, awareness of limitations. It gestured toward a small human-shaped figure projected on the platform, a holographic image of a girl no older than Clara, crouched and trembling. The projection mimicked her exact posture, mirrored her fear. Clara's breath caught. She knew, instinctively, that it was connected to her. "Do not be alarmed," the figure continued. "The projection is an echo, a template. It is a reflection of what will guide you toward transformation." Clara shook her head, stepping back. Her hands trembled. "I don't want this," she whispered. Her voice sounded distant to her own ears, swallowed by the chamber's resonance. "I want my mom. I want my dad. I want home." A ripple passed through the room, a subtle distortion, and the holographic figure shifted, turning its head toward her with soft, unthreatening movements. It seemed to breathe, to blink, to anticipate her every reaction. Clara's stomach twisted. The line between what was real and what was fabricated blurred before her eyes, and for the first time, she realized that the creatures here could manipulate more than just matter, they could manipulate perception itself. A vibration beneath her feet drew her attention downward. Small, delicate flowers, impossibly vibrant, began to grow from the seams of the floor, bending toward her as if seeking acknowledgement. The taller figure extended a translucent limb toward one of them, touching it lightly. The flower's petals unfurled in a sudden burst of color, and for a fraction of a second, Clara thought she saw a tiny, familiar face in the blossom, a fleeting resemblance to her mother. She blinked, and it was gone. "Focus, human child," the figure instructed. "Potential manifests only through attention. Your thoughts guide form. Your desire guides reality." Clara's pulse raced. Her mind swirled with confusion and fear, but curiosity tugged at her stubbornly. She wanted to reach out, to touch one of the flowers, to see if the fleeting vision could be made real. Her fingers hovered above the petals, and when she made contact, the flower shimmered violently, bending light and shadow, and a fragment of an image formed above it, a small, indistinct figure, shaped vaguely like a human, with features she longed to recognize. Her breath caught, tears stinging her eyes. The boy from the chamber whispered from behind her, his voice hoarse but urgent. "Don't get caught. They'll know you're trying something." Clara turned to him, startled. "Who are you?" "Jiro," he said quickly. "Been here longer than you. Seen things you don't want to see. Learned things they didn't mean for me to learn." He glanced at the projection above the flower. "But that's new. You can do things with it. Things we only dreamed of." Her stomach twisted at his words. The flower's petals pulsed with color, a holographic figure shifting minutely with every heartbeat she felt in her chest. Clara realized that the fear clawing at her mind was now tangled with fascination. She could make something appear. Something that could simulate life. Something that could maybe bring back the fragments of the people she loved. The taller figure observed silently, its presence pressing against her mind like water in a confined space. "Caution is recommended," it said, its voice a whisper that cut through the resonance. "But potential is always guided by the audacious. Choose wisely." Clara's hands trembled as she stepped closer to the flower, heart pounding in synchrony with the faint vibrations of the floor. Jiro's gaze held hers, steady, warning, and oddly reassuring. She realized then that survival here would not come from strength or speed but from understanding. Understanding how to bend what she could perceive, how to coax the world into shapes she could recognize. A sudden hiss of light passed through the chamber as a panel in the floor slid open, revealing a staircase descending into darker depths. The taller figure gestured toward it. Exploration continues. Observation deepens. Adaptation requires courage. Clara swallowed, her throat dry, and glanced at Jiro. He nodded, grimly, silently urging her forward. She took the first step down the staircase, feeling the pull of fear and wonder entwined, her mind alight with the unnerving promise of what the device hidden somewhere in this facility might allow her to do. The chamber behind them faded as they descended, colors bending and folding, walls breathing, and the hum of the alien world vibrating through Clara's very bones. She had been taken from everything familiar, from comfort and certainty, from a life where choices were easy. Here, she had nothing but possibility and terror, and already, she sensed the first flickers of power beginning to stir within her. The staircase twisted like a spiral of liquid metal, each step humming faintly under Clara's feet, vibrating through her bones and making her stomach lurch. She gripped the railing, though it was more suggestion than solid, and felt the faint warmth of it under her palms. Jiro descended ahead of her, his movements deliberate and cautious, every step measured, as if he had memorized the subtle anomalies of the alien structure. "This way," he whispered, his voice low but urgent. "The lower levels, they're different. More secure. More dangerous." Clara shivered, trying to steady her breathing. Her mind was already racing, replaying the image of the flower in the fragment of her mother that had appeared above it. She wanted to reach out, to grasp the impossible, but the memory of the tall figure's eyes, or whatever they were, pressed against her consciousness. She forced her gaze forward, following Jiro's steady lead. The spiral ended in a wide corridor, darker than the levels above, lit only by faint, undulating bioluminescence embedded in the walls. Shapes flickered in the shadows, twisting with impossible angles. Clara's pulse thumped in her throat. Some of the shapes seemed to move with intention, observing her as much as she observed them. The air smelled faintly of whetstone and ozone, making her eyes water. "This is where they keep the tools," Jiro said, glancing around nervously. "Devices. Things they use to manipulate perception. Not all of it is harmless." Clara swallowed, her curiosity sparking despite her fear. "Tools?" she asked. "Like the flower thing?" Jiro nodded. "Some of it. But the others, they've destroyed minds. Humans, mostly. Tried to make us think we were other people, or, worse. They're careful about who gets access." She swallowed hard. Her hand twitched, aching to reach toward one of the glowing panels on the wall, to touch the pulsing light and see if it could bend reality like the flower. The thought made her stomach tighten, a combination of excitement and dread she couldn't name. A low hum grew, resonating through the corridor. The walls began to shimmer, as if the very space around her was reacting to her thoughts. Clara froze. A small panel slid open in the floor, revealing a narrow ramp that led into a chamber she hadn't anticipated. Soft, green light spilled upward, illuminating objects that floated in midair, small devices, some crystalline, some organic, others neither. Jiro crouched slightly, his eyes scanning for movement. "That's it," he whispered. "The device you're looking for is in there. But, be careful. They'll know if you try anything unusual." Clara's heart thudded. The flower. The fragment of her mother. Could this chamber hold the key to that power? She stepped forward cautiously, feeling the pulse of the floor under her feet, a rhythm that seemed tied to her own heartbeat. Her hands hovered over a small, palm-sized device that floated like it had been suspended by water. It shimmered, delicate and impossible, almost alive. "You're reaching," Jiro cautioned, placing a hand lightly on her arm. "They can sense it. Just observe first." Clara's breath hitched. She obeyed, forcing her gaze to the object and not touching it. It pulsed faintly, responding to her presence, bending the light around it. She felt a strange thrill, as though it knew her thoughts and hesitated, waiting for her decision. Suddenly, the room shifted. Shadows deepened at the edges, and she felt the presence of the tall figure from above, though it did not appear. Its voice echoed faintly in her skull, "Potential is observed. Potential is guided. Misuse has consequences." Clara's pulse spiked. She wanted to argue, to demand it leave her alone, but her curiosity overpowered fear. She reached a trembling hand toward the device. The moment her fingers brushed the surface, light exploded around her. The object flared, bending the air and the shadows into a visible wave. The flower she had seen earlier flickered in her mind's eye, more vivid now, and a small fragment of her mother's image seemed to materialize in the periphery of her vision. She stumbled back, her knees weak, and Jiro grabbed her arm. "Did you see it?" he whispered urgently. "Did it?" A voice, sharper and colder this time, cut through the chamber. "Child, cease." The air thickened. Clara felt the walls constrict subtly, almost like the chamber itself was warning her. Curiosity is permitted, but interference is observed. Her fingers still tingled from the device. Clara's heart raced with exhilaration and terror. She realized in a shocking instant that she could create what she saw in her mind. That fleeting fragment of her mother could be called into existence, manifested from nothing, or at least from the device's alien technology. She felt power coursing through her in the most alien and impossible way, a force she barely understood, and yet it was undeniable. "Clara," Jiro said, his voice urgent, eyes wide, "you have to be careful. That's not just for play. They'll know. They'll." But Clara didn't stop. Tentatively, she focused on the memory of her mother's face, the curve of her smile, the warmth of her hand holding hers. The air shimmered, bending, folding around her intention, and for a heartbeat, the image coalesced, a small, luminous projection hovering above the device, delicate, human-shaped, and achingly familiar. Tears blurred her vision. She reached out, almost touching it, and the fragment of her mother's image wavered under her hand, like light caught on water. Jiro gasped. "It's real." "Kind of real," he whispered, awe-stricken. The chamber vibrated sharply, and the floor pulsed. Clara's stomach flipped as the walls rippled. The tall figure's presence returned, pressing against her mind like a wave of ice and light. "Child," it said, voice low, resonant, almost disappointed, "you step beyond observation. Know that creation carries consequence. Every act alters potential." Clara's hands hovered over the device, frozen between fear and longing. The image of her mother shimmered faintly, ephemeral, as if aware of its tenuous existence. She realized then that nothing here was fixed, nothing except the rules set by beings whose perception spanned the fragile boundary of her understanding. Jiro's hand found hers, grounding her. "You can do it," he said softly. "But we have to be smart. We can't let them know what we're capable of yet. You understand?" She nodded, swallowing hard, feeling both the immense thrill of her power and the icy weight of the danger it carried. The image of her mother flickered, a reminder of what she could manifest and what she could lose. The chamber's light pulsed once more, gently, almost like a heartbeat, and Clara took a deep breath, her eyes locked on the device. She was no longer merely a captive. She was becoming something else, someone who could manipulate the alien world itself, and perhaps, in time, bend it closer to the fragments of her life she refused to leave behind. Clara's fingers hovered over the device, trembling, as the projection of her mother's face shimmered faintly above it. The image was fragile, incomplete, yet impossibly real. She drew a shaky breath, forcing her mind to focus. Every memory she had of her mother, the warmth of her hands, the sound of her laughter, the curve of her smile, she summoned them, weaving them into a single, coherent vision. The device pulsed in response, light bending around her hands, shadows stretching and folding as if obeying her thoughts. "Careful," Jiro whispered from behind her, eyes darting nervously to the dark corners of the chamber. "They're watching every motion. Don't let them sense what you're doing." Clara swallowed hard, nodding, but she could feel the thrill of creation coursing through her, stronger than fear. The projection stabilized, growing more detailed, solidifying into the faint outline of her mother's full figure. Her chest tightened with longing and disbelief. She dared to stretch a trembling hand forward, and the figure's eyes that looked exactly like her mother's, met hers. "Mom," she whispered, her voice breaking. The sound seemed impossibly fragile in the alien silence of the chamber. The figure tilted its head, lips parting slightly, mirroring her expression, but it said nothing. Its presence, though silent, carried the warmth and familiarity of her mother in a way that made Clara's chest ache. She laughed softly, a sound of disbelief and hope tangled together, and Jiro's hand tightened on her shoulder. "Don't get carried away," he cautioned. "It's not fully real yet. You can. A sudden ripple ran through the chamber, and Clara froze. The walls pulsed faintly, the air vibrating as though the facility itself were aware of the act she had performed. Light bent around the device, casting distorted reflections across the floor. The tall figure's voice returned, calm but tinged with warning. Creation is observed. Control is required. Misuse may fracture potential. Clara's heartbeat quickened, but she ignored the warning. She had glimpsed what was possible, and she refused to step back. Tentatively, she reached out again, this time brushing her fingertips through the air where the figure's hand hovered. The projection shivered at her touch, flickering, then solidified further. The warmth she felt was almost tangible, and a small, startled gasp escaped her lips. It works, she breathed. It actually works. Jiro's eyes widened. You've done something no one else has managed. But they'll notice if it grows stronger. We need a plan. Clara nodded, unwilling to let go, unwilling to stop. Her mother's figure mirrored every subtle gesture she made, every emotion that passed through her mind. She could feel the contours of the face, the tilt of the head, the almost imperceptible shiver in the shoulders. For the first time since her abduction, Clara felt a fragile sense of control, a flicker of power she could call her own. Can you speak? She asked, voice trembling. The figure's lips moved slightly, shaping words she could almost hear, but they dissolved before reaching sound. Clara's heart twisted. It was almost enough, almost real, but not complete. She closed her eyes, summoning the memory of her mother's voice, her laughter, the comforting timbre that had calmed her in nightmares and scraped knees alike. The projection shimmered violently, and for a brief, terrifying instant, the chamber seemed to warp around her, shadows stretching unnaturally, walls breathing. When she opened her eyes, the figure of her mother stood fully formed, small and delicate, but unmistakably real. Its eyes held warmth, its posture mirrored her mother's, and Clara's chest tightened with the impossible surge of longing and grief. She reached out again, and this time, the figure's hand met hers, a light, ethereal touch that sent shivers through her body. Jiro's hand remained on her shoulder, grounding her. It's incredible, he whispered. But remember, every time you do this, they're closer to knowing. Don't let it get out of control. Clara nodded, swallowing hard, her focus torn between exhilaration and the growing awareness of danger. The projection's lips parted again, shaping words she could almost hear. Clara concentrated harder, willing the memory into sound. A soft, trembling voice filled her mind, not fully her mother's, but close enough to make her knees weaken. The room vibrated again. Shadows stretched, colors bending, the air humming with the latent awareness of the facility itself. The taller figure's presence pressed against her consciousness. Observation becomes action. Action invites consequence, it intoned. Clara's fingers tightened around the device, her determination rising. I don't care, she whispered, teeth gritted. I need her. I need her here. Jiro's eyes widened, a flicker of fear crossing his features. Clara, this is risky. You don't know what they'll do if they detect it fully. You could. But she ignored him. The projection's form solidified further, stepping closer, moving with her as if she had memory and intention baked into its being. Clara's heart swelled. She had done it. She had called forth something that shouldn't have existed, and for a fleeting, magnificent moment, she could hold it, breathe it, almost touch it. Then a soft chime sounded, resonant and cold. The device pulsed violently in her hand. Shadows bent sharply around the edges of the chamber, and the air thickened. Clara froze, fear snapping at the edges of her exhilaration. The taller figure's voice cut through again, sharper now, human child. Observation is no longer sufficient. Power wielded without understanding will be met with correction. Clara's pulse raced. She looked at Jiro, whose face was pale with warning. I don't care, she whispered. I can control it. I can. The device shuddered in her hands, light flaring like liquid fire, shadows rippling across the chamber. The projection of her mother's form quivered, eyes wide, almost sentient. Clara felt the immense weight of what she had done, the fragile line between possibility and catastrophe, and yet she could not stop. She reached out one more time, closing her eyes, focusing every memory, every fragment of love, every shred of longing she had left. The figure's hand met hers fully this time, warm, breathing, almost alive. Clara's chest ached, tears spilling over, but there was triumph in that ache. She had touched her mother, created her from memory, from longing, from the alien technology that pulsed beneath her fingertips. The chamber's walls rippled once more, shadows bending and folding, the hum of the facility resonating through her bones. Clara opened her eyes and gazed at the fragile projection. For the first time since her abduction, she felt a spark of hope, of control, and of something she had never imagined possible in this alien, merciless world. She knew, with the sharp clarity of terror and wonder intertwined, that nothing would ever be the same again. Clara sat cross-legged on the cold, pulsing floor, her hands trembling slightly as she watched the projection of her mother shift delicately before her. The figure's eyes were wide, almost sentient, tracking Clara's every movement. The warmth she felt wasn't fully real, but it was enough to make her chest ache with longing. Jiro crouched nearby, silent and tense, eyes darting to the edges of the chamber. "You really shouldn't," he whispered. "Every time you do this, they feel it. They know you're pushing it." Clara shook her head, unable to look away. "I can control it. I know I can. I just want her here, even for a little while." Her voice was small, trembling with a mixture of fear and longing. She reached out again, brushing the figure's ethereal hand. The projection quivered but remained stable, and Clara felt a thrill of triumph she hadn't experienced since her life on Earth. "Do you understand what you're doing?" Jiro asked, voice taut with tension. "This isn't just playing with light and shadows. It's bending reality in ways we barely understand." "They'll notice. They'll." "I don't care," Clara interrupted, her gaze fixed on the figure. "I can do this. I have to." Her mother's image stepped closer, mirroring Clara's movements as if reading her mind. The subtle warmth of presence, the almost real breath, the echo of a voice she could almost hear, it was intoxicating. Clara closed her eyes and concentrated, willing every memory of her mother into the figure, the lullabies, the laughter, the gentle discipline that had guided her childhood. The device pulsed under her fingertips, responding to her focus, bending the air, folding light, and threading shadows into delicate patterns that formed the outline of flesh and hair. Jiro's eyes widened. "You're doing more than I thought possible. But don't forget, they can sense intention, the strength of thought. If they feel it too strongly," his voice faltered. Before he could finish, the chamber vibrated sharply. Clara's eyes snapped open. The light around the device flared, bending the shadows into jagged, impossible angles. The taller Varathi presence she had felt earlier pressed against her mind, more insistent now, probing her focus. "You step beyond observation," it intoned, voice resonating through her skull. "Creation demands caution. Every act has consequence." Clara's pulse raced. Her hands hovered above the device, unsure whether to retreat or continue. The projection of her mother looked at her with something almost human in its gaze, small, fragile, and yet undeniably aware. Clara's chest tightened. She wanted to call it back, to keep it contained, but the longing in her heart refused. "I can do this," she whispered, more to herself than to Jiro. She exhaled slowly and pressed her fingers to the device, focusing on every detail she remembered. The projection solidified further, movements synchronized with her own, gestures precise, expressions delicate. For a fleeting moment, it felt alive. Jiro's voice came from behind her, anxious. "Clara, look." The wall at the far end of the chamber shimmered. Shadows twisted and stretched unnaturally, coalescing into forms Clara hadn't seen before. The Varathi presence had manifested partially, their translucent limbs and prismatic skin bending around the chamber like a living curtain. They observed her, not hidden now, their awareness undeniable. Clara froze. The warmth of her mother's image contrasted sharply with the icy, alien intelligence pressing on her mind. She felt fear and exhilaration mix, her pulse pounding in synchrony with the vibrations beneath her feet. "You cannot contain potential unobserved," the voice said, sharper now, tinged with disapproval. "Child, restraint is necessary. Power untempered fractures reality." Clara swallowed hard, gripping the device with both hands. The projection of her mother shimmered, flickering as if it sensed the intrusion. Her throat tightened. I won't lose her," she whispered, feeling a surge of determination unlike anything she had ever known. The figure in the air shifted, its limbs bending impossibly, leaning closer as though to examine her intent. Clara felt the full weight of its scrutiny, a presence that could read thought and intention as easily as seeing a reflection in water. She couldn't flinch. She couldn't falter. Every fiber of her being focused on the image before her. "Concentrate," Jiro urged, voice tense but steady. "Use it, but don't let it spiral. You have control, but only just. Focus on one thing at a time." Clara exhaled slowly, grounding herself. She concentrated on the image of her mother, willing it to stabilize fully, to hold in the alien reality around them. The device pulsed violently in her hands, light flaring and folding, shadows twisting around her fingers. The projection's eyes seemed to brighten, the small details of her mother's expression sharpening, becoming more tangible. Clara felt an almost unbearable mixture of triumph and fear. The taller figure's presence recoiled slightly, or at least Clara perceived it that way, as though it tested the limits of what she could manifest. "Child," it said, voice lower, more measured, "you have crossed into creation. Every act beyond this point will be observed, judged, and measured. Awareness is your only shield." Clara nodded, though her voice was lost in the hum of the chamber. She continued, fingers trembling, focusing on the warmth of her mother's smile, the curve of her hand reaching for hers. The projection solidified further, more human with every heartbeat. She could see the subtle tilt of the head, the gentle sway of the shoulders, the soft shine in the eyes. Jiro exhaled, voice tight. "You've done it," he whispered. "But don't forget, we have to be careful. They'll notice everything now. Every flicker, every pulse, every thought you put into it." Clara's hands hovered over the device, chest aching with longing and exhilaration. She looked at the projection, a fragile echo of her mother that existed only because she willed it to, and for the first time, she felt something like control in this alien world. The Varathi presence pressed against her awareness, but she held firm, feeling the electric thrill of possibility coursing through her. The chamber seemed to pulse in response, shadows folding around the edges, the air vibrating with latent intelligence. Clara swallowed hard, heart pounding, and reached out one more time, fingertips brushing the projection's hand. Warmth, fragile and impossible, met her own. She exhaled slowly, feeling a spark of triumph and danger intertwining. She had done it. She had created something real from memory, longing, and alien technology. And she knew, with sharp clarity, that nothing would ever be the same again. Clara sat cross-legged on the smooth, pulsating floor, the device cradled in her hands like it were an extension of her own body. The projection of her mother hovered before her, more stable than ever, her small form shimmering with soft, golden light. Every movement was synchronized perfectly with Clara's thoughts, gestures, and emotions. The warmth radiating from it was no longer fleeting, it lingered, brushing against her chest, threading through her mind like sunlight spilling into a shadowed room. Jiro crouched nearby, eyes darting constantly toward the edges of the chamber, every nerve on alert. "You're getting too good at this," he whispered, his voice low but taut. "They can feel it. Every pulse, every thought you put into it, they know." Clara shook her head, a small smile breaking across her lips. "I'm careful," she said softly, though she knew she was pushing boundaries. The fear that had gripped her in the shuttle, in the corridors, even in the first flickers of the projection, had transformed into a focused determination. She could control this now, or at least, she thought she could. "Don't get cocky," Jiro warned. "We don't know what the limits are." And if they realize how much control you have, his voice trailed off, and Clara understood without words. Consequences in this place were never small. She exhaled slowly, centering herself. Every detail of her mother's memory flowed into the device, the tilt of her head, the curve of her smile, the way she had held Clara's hand on quiet afternoons, the softness of her voice calling her name. The projection responded instantaneously, limbs bending fluidly, eyes tracking Clara with a faint shimmer of recognition. It was alive in a way that defied comprehension. The air vibrated subtly, and Clara felt the presence of the Varathi pressing against her awareness. It was no longer distant, no longer observing from the shadows. Its prismatic form manifested partially in the chamber, limbs bending at impossible angles, like refracting off its translucent skin. Its voice resonated directly inside her skull. Potential grows. Observation continues. Restraint is required, human child. Clara's pulse spiked, but she didn't move back. Instead, she focused harder, pushing the warmth of memory into the projection, willing it to stabilize further. The figure of her mother stepped closer, responding to the surge of intent, reaching out toward Clara with a gentle, deliberate movement. The sensation of her hand brushing against the projection was almost physical, a shockwave of longing and exhilaration that made her breath hitch. Jiro's hand pressed lightly on her shoulder. "You're risking a lot," he whispered. "Don't forget, they'll see it. They'll measure it. Every flicker, every pulse, every breath you give it." Clara swallowed, nodding. "I know. But I have to. I need to see if I can keep her, if I can make her real enough to matter." She focused on subtle movements now, refining them. The projection mirrored her tiny adjustments perfectly, the gentle tilt of the head, the flutter of a hand, the shift of weight from one foot to another. Clara could almost feel the memory of her mother's presence in the contours of the light, the way her mind mapped it into tangible warmth. The device pulsed with a rhythmic vibration, as if alive, responding to every nuanced command. The chamber around them began to shift, walls subtly bending, light refracting unpredictably, shadows folding in on themselves. The Varathi presence intensified, probing her awareness, testing her limits. "Child, restraint is necessary," it intoned. "Unmeasured creation fractures potential. Awareness is insufficient. Control must be precise." Clara's hands tightened around the device. Her chest ached with fear and longing, but she forced herself to focus. She would not falter. She would not let this power slip from her grasp. Every memory she had of her mother, every detail burned into her mind, she channeled into the projection. The figure shimmered brighter, more human, more real, responding perfectly to the intent she wove into it. Jiro's eyes widened. "It's incredible," he murmured. "You've stabilized it, almost fully. But the longer you do this, the closer they get." Clara's gaze was fixed on the projection. She reached out, brushing the figure's hand once more, willing the warmth to linger, the expression to deepen, the presence to solidify. It shivered faintly, then steadied. The light around it became richer, more defined, almost tangible. For a moment, Clara allowed herself to believe that she had succeeded, that she had bent this alien technology to her will and brought her mother back, even if only in part. Then the chamber pulsed sharply, and Clara froze. Shadows twisted unnaturally, folding and stretching across the walls. The Varathi presence loomed closer, its prismatic limbs bending in angles that defied physics, eyes, or what she perceived as eyes, focusing directly on her. Its voice cut through with precision, a mixture of curiosity and warning. "Child, the act of creation is noted. Expansion of potential is observed. Control is tested." Clara's pulse raced. She swallowed, grounding herself with a deep breath. She looked at Jiro, who gave a subtle nod, his eyes filled with tension and admiration. "Keep it steady," he whispered. "One step at a time. You can do this, but don't let it spiral." She refocused on the projection, pouring every ounce of memory, every trace of longing, every detail of her mother into it. The light folded around her hands, shadows bending to her intention. The projection responded with fluid grace, becoming more tangible, more precise, more alive with every heartbeat. The Varathi presence recoiled slightly, as if testing the boundaries of her control. Child, creation beyond observation carries consequence. Awareness alone is insufficient. Clara exhaled slowly, heart pounding. Her hands hovered over the device, feeling the pulse of potential, the fragile line between triumph and disaster. She looked at the projection, small, delicate, perfect in its own alien way, and felt a surge of exhilaration and resolve. She had mastered a fragment of power she barely understood, and she knew, with clarity that made her breath catch, that the consequences of what she was doing would follow her long after this moment. But for now, she held it. She had made it real. And in that impossible, fragile warmth, Clara felt a flicker of hope she had thought lost forever. The chamber was quieter now, the pulsing hum of the device settling into a steady rhythm beneath Clara's hands. The projection of her mother hovered before her, more complete than ever, every subtle movement, tilt of the head, curve of a smile, flicker of expression perfectly synchronized with Clara's thoughts. Her chest ached with longing and triumph, but she couldn't relax. She knew, instinctively, that the Varathi were aware. "They're close," Jiro whispered, crouched beside her, eyes scanning the edges of the room. His tone was tense, almost desperate. "They feel it. Every pulse, every flicker of light. Every breath you put into it, they know." Clara's fingers tightened on the device. She glanced at Jiro, noting the way his jaw was set, the way his eyes flicked to the shadows that bent unnaturally around the chamber. "I can control it," she said softly, more to herself than him. "I know I can. I just have to be careful." Jiro shook his head, lips pressed thin. "Careful isn't enough anymore. They're watching. They're testing you now. You're not just creating, they're measuring. Every thought, every intention. You can't hide it." The air vibrated subtly, almost imperceptibly at first, then stronger, pressing against Clara's mind. A presence manifested near the far edge of the chamber, prismatic and impossibly tall, its limbs bending in angles that seemed both elegant and threatening. The light from the walls refracted across its translucent form, creating a kaleidoscope of color that shimmered across the floor. "Child," the Varathi's voice resonated inside her skull, calm but sharp, leaving no room for argument, "your potential has grown. Observation alone no longer suffices. Your control expands beyond permissible limits." Clara's pulse raced, but she didn't move back. She forced herself to breathe steadily, grounding herself with Jiro's presence beside her. Her mother's projection floated gently, responding to the focus she poured into it, limbs bending fluidly, eyes soft, mirroring every emotion she conjured. The warmth it radiated was fragile, impossible, and yet undeniable. "You must understand," the Varathi continued, voice laced with something almost like curiosity, "creation without restraint invites consequence. Every act is noted. Every intention measured. Control is tested." Clara swallowed hard. I know," she whispered, though the truth was her heart was hammering, fear laced with exhilaration. She reached out toward the projection, brushing its hand with trembling fingers. It shimmered at her touch, responding perfectly to the thought she wove into it. Jiro's gaze darted toward the far edge of the chamber again, tension coiling in his posture. "They're not just watching. They're close enough now to intervene if you overreach. You need to calm it, Clara. Don't push too far." But she couldn't stop. She had glimpsed what was possible, and the yearning in her chest refused to be denied. Every memory of her mother, the softness of her hands, the sound of her voice, the curve of her smile flowed into her mind, threading into the projection. Light bent, shadows folded, and the device pulsed under her touch like a living heart. A ripple ran through the chamber, and Clara felt the presence tighten its focus, probing her awareness with precision. "Child," it said, voice now colder, sharper, "the act of creation is noted. Expansion of potential is observed. Overextension will be corrected." Her pulse jumped, but Clara refused to falter. She drew a deep breath, forcing her trembling hands to steady. The projection's form stabilized further, becoming more tangible, more defined, more alive with each heartbeat. She could see the subtle tilt of the head, the minute shift of weight, the soft shine in the eyes that mirrored her mother's own. Jiro's hand pressed lightly against her shoulder. "Don't let it spiral," he whispered. "They're testing the boundaries. One wrong move, and they'll intervene directly. You can do this, but stay focused." Clara's gaze never left the projection. She felt the thrill of control, the intoxicating power of creation that bent the alien technology to her will. And she felt the weight of consequence pressing against her mind, a cold reminder that the Varathi's attention was not idle. Observe, measure, adjust, the Varathi intoned, moving closer, its prismatic limbs bending with impossible fluidity. "Your potential is noted. Control must be precise. Every act will be recorded, every flicker of creation evaluated. Balance is required." Clara nodded, her hands hovering over the device. She could feel the pulse of the projection beneath her fingertips, the warmth of memory made tangible, the delicate life of her mother echoing through the light. She adjusted subtly, refining every gesture, every expression, ensuring stability. The chamber vibrated gently, the shadows folding and bending around her. The Varathi presence paused at the edge, testing, observing, pressing against her awareness without touching. Clara held her breath, heart pounding, aware that each second carried potential for triumph or catastrophe. Jiro's eyes were fixed on her, a mixture of awe and fear. "You've done more than anyone else," he whispered. "But now they're watching in full. Be ready." Clara exhaled slowly, closing her eyes for a moment. She focused entirely on the projection, every detail, every memory, every shard of longing she had. The light pulsed, shadows bent, the device responded, and for a heartbeat, the world seemed to align with her intention. The Varathi presence withdrew slightly, though its attention remained, a constant, chilling pressure. Its voice resonated one last time through her mind: potential is observed. Control is tested. Creation beyond observation carries consequence. Be mindful, human child. Clara's fingers tightened on the device. Her mother's projection floated before her, small, delicate, achingly real. She exhaled, heart pounding, aware that she had crossed a threshold. The Varathi were now fully aware of the depth of her power, and she knew, with sharp clarity, that every act from this point forward would be measured, monitored, and challenged. But for now, she held it. She had achieved mastery over the fragile, impossible fragment of her mother, and for the first time, she understood the delicate balance she would need to maintain. The chamber pulsed around her, shadows bending, light refracting, and Clara felt the intoxicating mixture of exhilaration, fear, and hope, the realization that she had become something the Varathi had not anticipated. She would have to be careful. But she would not stop. Clara sat on the cold, humming floor, the device resting in her lap like it weighed more than her entire body. The projection of her mother floated before her, more stable than ever, yet Clara could feel the fragile tension in every pulse of light and shadow. It responded perfectly to her thoughts, gestures, and emotions, but the exhilaration she had felt earlier was now tinged with something heavier, an almost suffocating weight of responsibility. Jiro crouched nearby, his eyes darting to the edges of the chamber, constantly scanning for signs of the Varathi. "Clara," he said quietly, voice tight with concern, "you're pushing it too far. You're not just creating anymore. You're bending reality. Every moment you do this, they feel it. Every fragment, every flicker, it's all registered. You can't keep going like this." Clara shook her head, her fingers tightening around the device. "I have to," she whispered, voice trembling. "I need her. I need to hold her here, even if it's just for a little while." The words left her throat heavy with longing and guilt. She could feel the pull of the Varathi awareness pressing against her mind, probing, testing, assessing every flicker of creation she allowed to exist. The projection mirrored her hesitation, tilting its head slightly, eyes soft and impossibly human. Clara reached out to touch its hand, and warmth spread through her chest, a surge of emotion so intense it made her knees weak. But the longer she held it, the more she felt the subtle tremor of instability, the device vibrating in response to both her longing and the pressure from the Varathi presence. "They're close," Jiro murmured, voice tight. "They're aware of how much control you have. Every act of creation is a signal. They can measure intention, focus, even emotion. You're tempting them." Clara's pulse quickened. She could feel it, the delicate, impossible line she was walking between triumph and catastrophe. The Varathi presence manifested partially at the edge of the chamber, translucent limbs bending in impossible angles, light refracting off them in harsh, prismatic patterns. Its voice resonated inside her skull. "Human child, creation beyond observation carries consequence. Potential is observed. Control is tested. Fragility of intention will be noted." Tears stung Clara's eyes, but she refused to let go. The projection of her mother mirrored every emotion she poured into it, reaching out, small hand brushing hers, responding perfectly to the thought she wove into it. Clara felt the warmth, the illusion of life, the near-tangible reality, and it tore at her heart. She wanted to hold it forever, to banish the isolation and terror of the Varathi facility, to reclaim the comfort and love she had lost. Jiro's hand pressed lightly on her shoulder. "Clara, listen to me," he said urgently. "You can't sustain this. The longer you manipulate it, the more they notice. They'll intervene. It won't just be observation next time, they'll act. You have to be careful." Clara exhaled shakily, chest tight with fear and longing. "I know," she whispered. But even as the words left her mouth, she could feel the surge of desperation in her heart. She couldn't stop now. She had created something impossibly real, and she couldn't bear to lose it. The thought of the projection flickering and disappearing, of the warmth vanishing, made her stomach twist. The Varathi presence pressed closer, probing deeper, testing the limits of her control. "Child," it said, voice colder, sharper, intention without understanding fractures potential. "Every act is measured. Every choice has consequence. Observation alone is insufficient." Clara's fingers tightened on the device, feeling the pulse of the projection, the fragile heartbeat of memory made tangible. She closed her eyes, summoning every detail she could remember, the tilt of her mother's head, the curve of her smile, the sound of her laughter, the comfort of her touch. Light bent and folded around her hands, shadows twisting as though alive, responding perfectly to her will. But the longer she focused, the more she felt the subtle tremors, the pressure of the Varathi awareness, the strain on the device, the faint quiver in the projection's form. Every pulse of light seemed to carry a weight she hadn't accounted for, a reminder that what she was creating existed on a knife edge between wonder and catastrophe. Jiro's voice was urgent now. "Clara, you have to stabilize it. Don't push it further. Every flicker you allow is a signal to them. You have to focus, or..." But she couldn't. The longing, the grief, the need to hold her mother, even if only as a projection, surged through her. She focused harder, pouring every fragment of memory and desire into the figure. The projection shimmered violently, then steadied, a fragile perfection of light and memory. Clara felt a tremor of triumph, but it was fleeting, immediately followed by the icy press of awareness. The Varathi were not just observing anymore, they were measuring, judging, waiting. The chamber vibrated softly, shadows folding unnaturally, light bending sharply. Clara exhaled slowly, heart pounding, aware that she had crossed a threshold. She could maintain this, control this, for now, but the cost was rising. Every act of creation had consequence, every flicker of intention was noted. The fragile warmth in her chest, the projection she had called into being, existed only because she willed it, and the Varathi were aware. She looked at Jiro, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe. I can't stop," she whispered, voice trembling. "Not now. Not when it's this real. Not when I've finally found her." He nodded reluctantly, hands still on her shoulder. "Then we have to be smart. We have to survive this. They'll push back. They always do. But right now, you have her. Clara exhaled, her hands hovering over the device, feeling the fragile pulse of her mother's projection, the warmth threading through memory and light. The chamber hummed, shadows folding, the air vibrating with latent intelligence, and she realized that every choice from this point forward would carry weight, danger, and consequence. But she would not let go. For the first time, she understood that creation, memory, and desire were intertwined in a fragile dance, and that she had just begun to learn the steps. The chamber was alive with subtle vibrations, a low hum threading through the floor and walls, matching the pulse of the device in Clara's hands. The projection of her mother floated before her, radiant and impossibly precise, every motion perfectly mirroring Clara's intent. The warmth it radiated pressed against her chest, a reminder that this fragile illusion carried pieces of her heart in memory. Jiro crouched a short distance away, his body tense, eyes flicking to every shadowed corner of the chamber. "Clara," he whispered urgently, voice taut with fear, "they're not just observing anymore. They're measuring, adjusting. The longer you keep this up, the more direct their response will be." Clara's pulse raced, but she didn't look away. The projection of her mother's small hand reached for hers, fingers brushing softly against her own. It was a warmth that defied logic, the echo of what she had lost, a thread of impossible hope in the cold alien reality. "I can control it," she whispered, though even as she said it, she knew the truth, she was pushing limits she barely understood. The Varathi presence coalesced fully in the chamber, light fracturing across their translucent limbs, angles bending impossibly, skin shimmering like liquid crystal. Its voice resonated inside Clara's mind, calm but threaded with authority. "Human child. Observation is no longer sufficient. Control is tested. Expansion of potential invites intervention." Clara's breath caught. She could feel the press of its awareness, probing, measuring the depth of her creation. Every pulse of intention, every fragment of memory infused into the projection, was being scrutinized. Yet she refused to retreat. She could stabilize this, she had to. The thought of losing the projection, of watching it flicker and vanish, made her stomach twist with dread. Jiro leaned closer, eyes wide. "They're moving in closer. If you overreach, they won't just observe. They'll act. You have to be precise." One wrong move, his voice trailed off, but the warning was clear. Clara nodded, forcing herself to breathe, focusing entirely on the projection. She wove every detail of her mother into it, the tilt of the head, the curve of her lips, the softness of her hands, the cadence of her voice in memory. The device pulsed violently in response, shadows folding and stretching across the chamber as though alive. She felt the thrill of power and the weight of responsibility intertwined, a heady mixture that made her chest ache. The Varathi presence shifted, limbs bending in angles that defied understanding, its voice pressing against her mind with cold clarity. "Child, creation beyond measured observation is noted. Control is tested. Intentionality is fragile. Overextension will be corrected." Clara's fingers tightened on the device. She could feel the pulse of the projection beneath her touch, the fragile heartbeat of memory made tangible. She reached out, brushing her mother's hand again, and for a brief, shining instant, the warmth felt as real as it had on Earth. But the chamber vibrated sharply, a warning that the Varathi were preparing to assert themselves. Jiro's voice was urgent now, a sharp whisper cutting through the tension. "Clara, steady it. Don't let it spiral. They're testing you, now more directly. You can maintain this, but if they perceive instability, they'll intervene." The projection shimmered at her touch, light bending unnaturally, shadows twisting in response to her focus. Clara's breath quickened, fear and exhilaration coursing through her in equal measure. She could feel the boundaries of the device, of the chamber, and of her own mind straining under the weight of what she was sustaining. The Varathi presence moved closer, pressing its awareness directly against hers. "Child, potential is expanding. Observation is no longer adequate. Measured control is required. Imbalance will be met with consequence." Clara's heart pounded. She swallowed hard, forcing her thoughts to steady, concentrating on the projection with every ounce of focus she could muster. Its form became more stable, movements fluid and precise, expressions delicate and mirroring her mother perfectly. The light folded around her hands, shadows bending in perfect harmony with her intention. Jiro's eyes were wide, voice tense. "You've done it, stabilized it. But now, they're preparing for something more. Be ready." They'll probe deeper. Clara exhaled, chest tight, refusing to release her hold. The projection hovered perfectly, small hands still brushing hers. The warmth, though fragile, threaded through her consciousness, anchoring her in the impossible beauty of what she had created. The Varathi presence paused at the chamber's edge, bending and twisting in angles that seemed both deliberate and probing, assessing her control, measuring her limits. "You are beyond observation," its voice resonated, sharper now, colder. "Control is tested. Creation beyond permissible thresholds is acknowledged. Intervention will follow if balance is not maintained." Clara's fingers tightened further around the device, the pulse of the projection thrumming in response. She could feel the line between triumph and catastrophe narrowing, every heartbeat a negotiation with forces she barely understood. The chamber's walls seemed to breathe, shadows folding and unfolding, light bending sharply across the crystalline surfaces. I can keep it stable," she whispered, voice trembling, yet resolute. "I won't let it break. I won't lose her." The Varathi presence recoiled slightly, or at least Clara perceived it as such, testing the limits of her control. Its voice echoed again, measured in cold, "Human child, potential is acknowledged. Observation continues. Imbalance will be corrected. Persistence without precision will be met with response." Clara exhaled slowly, heart pounding, aware that she had crossed a threshold. The projection of her mother floated before her, radiant, delicate, and achingly real. Every pulse of light, every flicker of shadow, every subtle gesture was proof that she had mastered something beyond comprehension, but the Varathi were no longer passive observers. She glanced at Jiro, eyes wide. "There, ready," she whispered. He nodded, tense, a silent acknowledgement of the confrontation they were about to face. Clara's hands hovered over the device, steady now despite the tremor in her chest. She had created life from memory and longing, bent alien technology to her will, and now faced the full measure of the beings who had abducted her. The chamber pulsed with energy, shadows folding, light refracting, and Clara felt the delicate balance of power shift. She could not falter. She would not falter. Clara's hands hovered over the device, heart pounding, as the chamber thrummed with the tension of the Varathi presence pressing closer than ever. Light fractured across the walls, shadows folding unnaturally, and the prismatic limbs of the alien observers bent at impossible angles, their awareness focused entirely on her. Every pulse of the device, every flicker of the projection, was measured, weighed, scrutinized. Her mother's figure hovered before her, radiant, delicate, perfect. Every subtle gesture, tilt of the head, curve of the lips, mirrored the memories Clara had infused into it. The warmth pressing against her chest was almost unbearable, a mixture of longing and triumph, the impossible made tangible through alien technology. She could not let it vanish, not now, not ever. Jiro crouched beside her, eyes sharp and alert. "Clara," he whispered, voice tense, "they're not just observing. They're deciding. If you falter, if the projection wavers, they'll act. You have to be precise." One wrong move, his voice faltered, but the warning was clear. Clara exhaled, steadying herself. "I can do this," she murmured, almost to herself. "I can hold her. I can keep her here." She focused on every detail, the warmth of her mother's hands, the sound of her voice, the curve of her smile, the soft sway of her body, the subtle shine in her eyes. The device pulsed violently under her fingertips, shadows folding, light bending, the room trembling with her intention. The Varathi presence pressed closer, probing, bending, twisting. Its voice resonated inside her skull, calm yet insistent. "Human child, creation beyond observation is noted. Potential is measured. Imbalance will be corrected. Persistence without precision invites consequence." Clara's pulse raced. She could feel the boundary between control and disaster narrowing, but she refused to falter. She reached out, fingertips brushing her mother's projection. The warmth surged through her chest, tangible and impossible, a heartbeat threaded through light and memory. The projection mirrored her motion, hand pressing against hers, eyes glimmering with familiarity and understanding. Jiro's hand pressed lightly on her shoulder. "Keep it steady," he whispered. "Hold it. Don't let the fear of them break you. You can do this." Clara exhaled slowly, focusing entirely on the figure before her. The light folded seamlessly around her hands, shadows bending perfectly in response to thought and memory. She poured every ounce of longing, every fragment of grief and hope into the projection. The device pulsed, responding in perfect harmony. For a fleeting moment, she felt invincible, as if she had touched something beyond the reach of the Varathi themselves. The prismatic presence of the Varathi bent closer, limbs stretching impossibly, their awareness probing the edges of her mind. "Child," it intoned, voice sharp and clear, "potential is acknowledged. Observation continues. Control is tested. Imbalance will be corrected if persistence falters." Clara's chest tightened, fear and exhilaration intertwined. She could feel the tension in the chamber, the weight of their judgment, but she forced herself to focus, every thought, every memory, every emotion channeled into the projection. The figure of her mother shimmered faintly, then stabilized fully, small hand pressing against hers with a warmth that made her knees weak. Jiro's voice was steady now, quiet but firm. "You've done it, Clara. You've held it together. But they're testing how far you can go. They're waiting for your choice." Clara swallowed hard, looking into the projection's eyes, searching for the connection she had longed for. She could feel the Varathi presence waiting, assessing, their gaze pressing against her awareness like ice and crystal. She had a choice: falter or persist. She exhaled, steadying herself, and made her decision. "I choose to keep her," she whispered, voice trembling but resolute. "I choose to hold her here, even if they object." The chamber pulsed sharply. Shadows folded violently, then settled. Light fractured across the walls, then bent smoothly, refracting in harmony with the projection's form. The Varathi presence paused, limbs still, awareness pressing lightly against her mind. For a heartbeat, nothing moved, nothing breathed except the soft pulse of the device and the warmth of the projection. Then, almost imperceptibly, the Varathi withdrew slightly, their presence bending away, still vigilant but no longer immediate in threat. "Human child," the voice resonated, softer now, tempered. "Potential is acknowledged. Persistence is measured. Creation beyond observation is permitted within bounds. Control maintained. Observation will continue, but intervention is not required at this time." Clara exhaled, chest heaving, tears welling in her eyes. She looked at her mother's figure, radiant and perfect, hands still pressed against hers. The warmth, fragile and impossible, filled her heart, weaving hope through grief, memory through longing. She could hold this. She could keep her. Jiro's hand remained on her shoulder, grounding her. "You did it," he whispered, voice filled with awe. "You actually did it. But stay focused, they're still aware. We've won a small victory, but this isn't over." Clara nodded, though her gaze never left the projection. "It doesn't matter," she said softly, voice trembling with emotion. "For now, she's here. That's enough." The chamber pulsed with a quiet resonance, shadows folding gently, light refracting across the walls. The Varathi presence lingered at the edge, observing, but it had not acted. Clara exhaled fully, letting the warmth of the projection fill her chest, the memory of her mother interwoven with the miraculous, fragile reality she had created. For the first time since her abduction, Clara felt a spark of triumph and hope that was wholly her own. She had bent alien technology, memory, and longing into a tangible connection, defying fear, isolation, and the scrutiny of the Varathi. She had mastered a fragment of power that was almost beyond comprehension, and in that mastery, she found something even more precious, the echo of family, love, and home. She squeezed the device gently, feeling the pulse of the projection beneath her fingertips. The warmth pressed against her heart, and she smiled through tears. Whatever the future held, whatever consequences awaited, she had found a victory that no alien presence could take from her. Clara exhaled again, steadying herself. Her mother's figure remained, radiant and alive in light and memory. The Varathi watched, but for now, they did not interfere. The chamber was still, alive only with the gentle pulse of the device and the impossible, fragile warmth of creation made tangible. And Clara, for the first time in a long time, felt whole.